How you doing, Adam? How's everything?
Everything's great. Thank you for having me, and I'm surprised there is a time when you're not on the air. I don't know what's going on.
I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say, but I'm just grinding, and I got to tell you, I'm looking so forward to this NBA season, and I always do every year, but none more so in recent memory than this one. But I'll get into that in a second. Before I do anything else, I just wanted your comments on the passing of Paul Allen. Obviously, I've had the pleasure of meeting him on several occasions as an owner for the Portland Trail Blazers. We also know he owned the Seattle Seahawks in the NFL. He passed away a couple of days or so ago. Just your thoughts about him. He was a phenomenal man for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I'll just say one, he didn't have as big a public profile as a lot of our owners do, but of course he's was one of the longest standing owners in the NBA. He'd been an owner for 30 years, so I've known him since the day I got into the league roughly 26 years ago. And as you know, earlier in my career, I was heavily involved in our technology initiatives. I ran NBA Entertainment. And Paul, of course, I remember when I first started, as a young man at the NBA, to think we had one of the co-inventors of the PC was an owner in the NBA. And early on, I sat with him frequently just to get his advice, early days of the Internet, early days of websites, then apps in terms of just giving me his thoughts on the direction the league should be taking. So he was an incredible resource just to me personally in the league office. He also, fairly quietly served on some very important committees. He was involved in collective bargaining in 2011. Most recently, he's been heavily involved in the planning committee, which deals with revenue sharing. I would say, despite his individual wealth, he was the leading advocate for revenue sharing for small market teams. I mean, he felt that was critically important for every team in the league to have the ability to compete. And I think people credited him when we ultimately got the last two revenue sharing deals done. I think he deserved the lion's share of the credit for moving the agenda forward on behalf of all the small market teams in the league.
Adam, I think about him, and I also obviously think about his ownership over the Seahawks in the National Football League, just because it's in Seattle. Obviously, it's a town that he's incredibly fond of, and recently the NBA had an exhibition game there, a preseason game there, rather, and we saw Kevin Durant don Sean Kemp's old jersey coming out during introductions. We heard the roar of that crowd. We know how phenomenal of a sports town the city of Seattle really, really is. Your thoughts about that experience and the possibility of us seeing an NBA team in Seattle someday in the near future, especially considering.
Stephen, I'll connect that question back to your first one.
Sure.
Paul had raised with me several times the prospects of bringing the NBA back to Seattle because, of course, he owned the Portland Trail Blazers, but he personally lived in Seattle, and he cared deeply for that market. And the conversation he and I had, and, of course, Steve Ballmer, now as the owner of the Clippers, is a Seattle resident as well.
Yeah.
And essentially where we are is that while I think everyone agrees it's a fantastic market, and all of us, you and me included, who were with the league when we had the Sonics in Seattle, loved going there. It was a great destination, and there's some storied teams that played there. We're just not in expansion mode at the moment. Invariably, you're going to ask me, one of the questions I generally get is, why don't you have more teams that aren't competing for the championship? And so I think all of our focus right now is developing a deeper league, a team where the view from fans is that every team is truly in the position to compete for a championship. And we've got a long way to go from that standpoint. So I think it's inevitable that at some point we'll look to expansion. I think it's natural that all businesses over time will grow, and there's no doubt that Seattle will be one of those markets that we'll circle and we'll focus on, but it's just not part of the discussion at the moment.
Well, Adam, I got to confess to you, in the interest of full disclosure, I wasn't even thinking about expansion rather. What I was thinking about is that you might have some teams in the NBA right now that would be better suited being someplace else other than where they are. And I'm not going to get into specifics in regards to that, but I would ask you, is that a possibility? Are all 30 markets great, or is it possible that we might see relocation down the line as opposed to expansion?
It's like asking a father about his children.
Oh.
What market's better than another? I would just say, of course, if you rank the markets, some have bigger television markets, some have more corporate headquarters, some have more wealth. So there's no doubt from an economic standpoint, some markets are better than others. On the other hand, look how much the world has changed in the last 10 years because of social and digital media, where take Russell Westbrook in a relatively small market like Oklahoma City. He's globally famous. Where he has some of the top endorsement deals of any player in the league. Take Giannis in Milwaukee. I don't think anybody could legitimately say if only he were in Chicago, then he would be better known. I think what the players in this league recognize now is that it's about winning, and no market's perfect. There's pluses and minuses. Weather, taxes, housing, etc. But I think most importantly these days, when I have conversation with players and their agents, first and foremost, they know that all the benefits are going to come from winning championships. But then to answer your question more directly, there are some markets that don't do as well as others, but then there are a lot of practical issues. One, the NBA Constitution lays out precisely the factors that we look at for when a team could be moved. As you recall, before Steve Ballmer bought the Clippers, he tried to buy the Kings and relocate them to Seattle.
Right.
But when we went through all the factors and then Kevin Johnson stepped in and got a new arena built in Sacramento, it made more sense for the team to stay there. And there are some other markets that have come up, but that frankly the teams have long-term leases there, so the teams won't be going anywhere for any time. And I just lastly say, as the commissioner, I would view it as a failure if we move a team out of a market. I think we would do everything we possibly could to ensure that a team is successful where it currently is, rather than looking at other markets.